Luzon, Philippines. February 19th, 45. Captain Takeshi Yamamoto crouched behind the shattered remains of a concrete pillbox, his hands trembling as he gripped the unfamiliar weight of an American Browning M1919 machine gun. The weapon had been captured 3 days earlier, when his unit overran an isolated American supply depot during a desperate counterattack. Now, as American forces advanced through the valley below, Yamamoto stared at this machine gun with something approaching disbelief. For 2 hours that morning, he had test-fired the weapon into the jungle, cycling through belt after belt of 30-06 ammunition. The sustained rate of fire was unlike anything he had experienced in 7 years of military service. 500 rounds per minute, steady and relentless. The barrel heated but did not fail. The mechanism fed smoothly, without the constant jamming that plagued Japanese weapons. And the sound, that distinctive hammering rhythm, was utterly different. From the slow, stuttering cadence of the Type 92 heavy machine gun his squad had been issued. The realization was devastating, not because it was new, but because it was undeniable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He had always known, in some abstract way, that American weapons were superior, but knowing and understanding were different things. And now, holding this machine gun, feeding belt after belt through its action, watching it perform with mechanical precision that Japanese factories could not replicate, Yamamoto understood with perfect clarity why Japan was losing the war. It wasn't spirit. It wasn't training. It wasn't courage or dedication or willingness to die for the emperor. It was this: simple, brutal mathematics. 500 rounds per minute against 450. Reliability against constant malfunction. Industrial capacity against resource scarcity. The realization was devastating not because it was new, but because it was undeniable. The story of Japanese machine gun inadequacy did not begin with Captain Yamamoto's revelation in the Philippine jungle. It began decades earlier, in the foundries and design bureaus of Japan, where engineers worked under constraints that Western powers could barely imagine. The tale is not one of incompetence or lack of innovation. It is a story of choices made under impossible circumstances, of industrial limitations that could not be overcome by determination alone, and of soldiers who paid the price for decisions made in distant offices, years before they ever fired a shot in combat. The Type 92 heavy machine gun, the backbone of Japanese infantry firepower throughout the Second World War, was not a bad weapon by the standards of its time. Designed by Nambu in 1932, it represented a logical evolution from the earlier Type 3 heavy machine gun. The Type 92 was chambered for the improved 7.7mm rimmed cartridge, replacing the underpowered 6.5mm round that had proven inadequate in combat operations in China. The weapon was gas-operated and air-cooled, eliminating the need for the heavy water-cooling systems that had characterized machine guns of the First World War. At 45.5 inches in length, with a barrel accounting for over 2 feet of that measurement, the Type 92 was a substantial weapon. With its required tripod, the complete system weighed 122 pounds, requiring multiple infantry soldiers to transport it into position. The Type 92's specifications appeared reasonable on paper. Muzzle velocity was approximately 2,400 feet per second. Effective range extended to 870 yards. The weapon featured large diameter cooling fins around the barrel to manage heat buildup during sustained fire. Iron sights were mounted offset slightly to the right, an unusual design choice that would characterize Japanese machine guns throughout the war. Optional periscopic sights of various types could be fitted for improved accuracy at distance. But the Type 92 had fundamental design characteristics that would prove catastrophic in combat against American forces. The most significant was its rate of fire, between 400 and 450 rounds per minute. This was not an accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate design choice made to address specific problems Japanese engineers had identified with earlier weapons. The Type 3 machine gun, from which the Type 92 was derived, had suffered from barrel overheating during sustained fire. Japanese engineers, working with the air-cooled design inherited from the French Hotchkiss machine gun, needed to prevent barrels from failing during extended engagements. The solution was straightforward: reduce the rate of fire. A slower cycling weapon generated less heat, required fewer barrel changes, and consumed ammunition at a more sustainable rate for an army whose logistics were already strained. The Japanese military establishment viewed this as a reasonable compromise. A rate of fire between 400 and 450 rounds per minute was sufficient for suppressive fire. It reduced ammunition consumption, which was critical for an empire whose industrial capacity could not match Western powers. And it solved the overheating problem that had plagued earlier weapons. But this design choice carried consequences that would become apparent only in combat. The Type 92's slow rate of fire produced a distinctive sound, a stuttering, irregular cadence that Allied soldiers quickly learned to recognize. American and Australian troops fighting in the Pacific gave the weapon a nickname that would follow it throughout the war: the woodpecker. The name was not affectionate, it was descriptive. The Type 92's firing signature sounded like someone chopping wood, with an axe, slow and deliberate, each burst clearly distinguishable from the next. The woodpecker's second major limitation was its feeding system. Unlike belt-fed Western machine guns that could fire continuously until ammunition was exhausted, the Type 92 used 30-round metal strips. An operator had to manually insert each strip into the weapon's feed mechanism. This interrupted sustained fire and created additional opportunities for malfunction. The 30-round strips represented another design compromise. Japanese military planners wanted a feeding system that was simpler to manufacture than belted ammunition and easier for infantry to transport. Strips could be loaded with standard rifle ammunition, simplifying logistics. They were lighter than equivalent lengths of belted ammunition, and they were less prone to damage during transport through jungle terrain. But in combat, these advantages disappeared. The need to reload every 30 rounds meant that even a perfectly functioning Type 92 could not maintain the sustained fire that characterized Western machine guns. The brief pause required to insert a new strip, verify its seating, and resume firing created gaps in suppressive fire that enemy troops could exploit. And the mechanical complexity of the strip feeding mechanism created new failure points. The Type 92's third critical flaw was its oiling system. Japanese engineers had incorporated an internal oil pump that mechanically dispensed a small amount of lubricant onto each cartridge as it fed into the weapon. This was intended to prevent extraction problems, ensuring smooth ejection of spent cartridges, even in adverse conditions. The oiling system worked as designed under ideal circumstances. In laboratory testing and firing range trials, the mechanism functioned reliably. Cartridges were oiled, extraction proceeded smoothly, and the weapon performed within acceptable parameters. But combat conditions were never ideal. In the tropical environments where Japanese forces fought throughout the Pacific, the oiling system became a liability. Oil attracted dust and dirt, particularly in jungle environments where humidity, vegetation, and soil created a constant stream of particulate matter. Oiled cartridges collected grime as they were handled and loaded into feed strips. When these contaminated cartridges entered the weapon, they deposited dirt and debris directly into the breech mechanism. Misfed cartridges became an all-too-common occurrence. Jams increased in frequency. Extraction failures multiplied. Japanese armorer manuals emphasized the importance of keeping the Type 92 meticulously clean. Maintenance procedures specified regular cleaning intervals and detailed instructions for dismantling and reassembling the weapon. But in combat, particularly during sustained operations, maintaining the level of cleanliness required for reliable function proved impossible. Machine gun crews found themselves trapped between two imperatives: fire the weapon and risk jamming from accumulated grime, or cease fire to clean it and leave infantry without suppressive fire support. The nickname woodpecker, given by Allied soldiers, captured more than just the weapon's sound. It captured its essence: slow, distinctive, easy to identify and locate, and ultimately inadequate for the kind of industrial warfare that characterized the Pacific Campaign. American forces fighting in the Pacific quickly learned that the woodpecker's firing signature provided tactical intelligence. The slow rate of fire and distinctive cadence allowed troops to distinguish Japanese machine gun positions from American ones, even in dense jungle where visibility was limited. This was not a minor consideration. In the confusion of jungle combat, where units could become disoriented and friendly fire was a constant concern, the ability to identify enemy weapons by sound alone provided a significant advantage. Moreover, the woodpecker's slow rate of fire created opportunities for maneuver. American infantry tactics emphasized fire and movement, with squads using suppressive fire to pin enemy positions while other elements maneuvered for advantage. Against German MG-42 machine guns in Europe, with their fearsome 1,200 rounds per minute rate of fire, such tactics required careful coordination and acceptance of significant risk. Against the Type 92, with less than half that fire rate, American squads found they could move more freely. The gaps between bursts, the pauses for strip changes, and the reduced volume of fire all created windows of opportunity that aggressive infantry could exploit. The Type 92 was not the only machine gun in Japanese service during the Pacific War. The Type 96 light machine gun, introduced in 1936, and its successor, the Type 99, introduced in 1939, provided squad-level automatic fire support. These weapons were gas-operated, magazine-fed designs that bore superficial resemblance to the British Bren gun, though they were not direct copies. The Type 96 fired the 6.5mm Arisaka cartridge from a 30-round detachable box magazine. Its rate of fire was approximately 550 rounds per minute, faster than the Type 92 but still slower than comparable American weapons. The Type 96 weighed approximately 19 pounds empty, making it relatively portable for a light machine gun. It featured a finned barrel that could be quickly changed to prevent overheating, a folding bipod for stable firing, and, uniquely among Second World War machine guns, the capability to mount a standard infantry bayonet. The Type 99 was essentially an improved Type 96, rechambered for the more powerful 7.7mm cartridge that had become standard for Japanese forces by the late 1930s. The Type 99 featured better primary extraction than its predecessor, reducing the need for the troublesome oiling system that had plagued earlier Japanese automatic weapons. Early production models included a monopod under the stock and a flash suppressor on the muzzle. The Type 99's rate of fire increased to approximately 800 rounds per minute, a significant improvement over the Type 96. Both weapons were considered adequate by Japanese standards. They were lighter than comparable Western machine guns, making them easier to transport through difficult terrain. They used the same ammunition as standard infantry rifles, simplifying logistics, and they provided squad-level automatic fire support that Japanese tactical doctrine considered sufficient for infantry operations. But adequate is not the same as superior, and in combat against American forces, adequate was not enough. The Browning M1919 machine gun that Captain Yamamoto test-fired in the Philippine jungle represented everything the Type 92 was not. Designed by John Moses Browning in the immediate aftermath of the First World War, the M1919 was an air-cooled development of the water-cooled M1917 that had served American forces in the trenches of France. The M1919A4, the variant most commonly used by American forces in the Pacific, was a recoil-operated belt-fed weapon chambered for the 30-06 Springfield cartridge. It measured 37.9 to 4 inches in overall length with a 24-inch barrel. Empty weight was 31 pounds, comparable to the Type 92 despite being a significantly more robust weapon. With its tripod, the complete system weighed approximately 52 pounds, less than half the weight of a Type 92 with its tripod. The M1919 cyclic rate of fire was 400 to 600 rounds per minute. This range reflected variations in individual weapons ammunition specifications, and wear conditions. But the critical figure was the sustained rate of fire, the rate at which the weapon could fire continuously without barrel damage or mechanical failure. For the M1919A4, this was approximately 500 rounds per minute. This 50 round per minute difference between the M1919's sustained rate and the Type 92's maximum rate might seem small. In the abstract, it represented an increase of only 11%, but in combat, that difference compounded across time, across multiple weapons, and across tactical situations in ways that transformed the battlefield. Consider a single engagement lasting 5 minutes. An American machine gun crew with an M1919 firing at sustained rate could deliver 2,500 rounds. A Japanese crew with a Type 92 firing at maximum rate could deliver 2,250 rounds, assuming no malfunctions and no delays for strip changes. The American crew had a 250-round advantage, but this calculation assumed perfect conditions for the Japanese weapon. In reality, the Type 92's strip feeding system required brief pauses every 30 rounds. The oiling system created opportunities for malfunction. The slower cycle rate meant longer exposure to enemy fire for any individual soldier attempting to move under suppressive fire. Now multiply this across an entire company engagement, with multiple machine guns on each side. The cumulative effect was not linear, it was geometric. American forces could put more rounds downrange, sustain fire for longer periods, and maintain suppression more effectively. Japanese forces found their suppressive fire inadequate to pin American units, their ammunition depleted more quickly relative to effect achieved, and their weapons failing at critical moments. But the numerical difference in rates of fire was not the most significant disparity. The real advantage of the M1919 lay in its reliability, its ammunition capacity, and the industrial system that supported it. The M1919 was belt-fed, using either woven cloth belts or, later in the war, metal disintegrating link belts. A standard belt contained 250 rounds, though longer belts could be assembled as needed. This meant an American machine gun crew could sustain fire for extended periods without interruption. No pauses to change 30-round strips, no breaks in suppression, just continuous, mechanical fire until the belt was exhausted or the barrel required changing. The weapon's reliability was legendary. American manufacturers had developed precision machining techniques that ensured parts fit properly and tolerances remained within acceptable ranges. The M1919's recoil operation was mechanically simpler than the gas-operated systems used in most Japanese weapons, with fewer parts and fewer potential failure points. And critically, the M1919 did not require an oiling system. Cartridges were loaded dry. Extraction relied on proper chamber dimensions and appropriate spring tension, not on lubrication that could attract contaminants. In the tropical environments of the Pacific, where humidity, rain, sand, and jungle vegetation created constant maintenance challenges, the M1919's tolerance for adverse conditions proved decisive. American machine gun crews discovered that the weapon would continue to function even when encrusted with mud, soaked with salt water, or clogged with sand. Regular cleaning improved reliability, but was not absolutely necessary for basic function. The Type 92, by contrast, required constant attention. Neglect invited malfunction. The industrial systems supporting these weapons differed even more dramatically than the weapons themselves. The M1919 was produced in enormous quantities by American manufacturers operating at unprecedented scales of production. Rock Island Arsenal alone produced approximately 397,000 M1919, of 4 variants during the war years. When production from all sources is combined, including variants for different applications, total M1919 production exceeded 438,000 weapons. Japan produced approximately 45,000 Type 92, heavy machine guns during the weapon's entire production run from 1932 to 1941. The disparity was nearly 10 to 1. American forces could equip every company, every platoon, every defensive position with machine guns in abundance. Japanese forces had to husband their limited weapons carefully, parceling them out based on priority and availability. But numbers alone do not tell the complete story. The ammunition supply situation was even more lopsided. American industry produced .30-06 ammunition in quantities that seemed impossible by Japanese standards. Factories across the United States operated continuously, producing billions of rounds annually. Supply ships carried ammunition across the Pacific in quantities that Japanese logistics officers, accustomed to chronic shortages, could scarcely comprehend. American machine gun crews were encouraged to fire extensively. Training emphasized volume of fire, with soldiers learning to walk fire across enemy positions and maintain sustained suppression. Ammunition was plentiful enough that profligate use was acceptable, even encouraged. The tactical doctrine assumed that ammunition would be available in effectively unlimited quantities. Japanese machine gun crews operated under opposite constraints. Ammunition was scarce, supply lines were tenuous, and resupply was uncertain. Gunners were trained to fire in short, controlled bursts, conserving ammunition for critical moments. This was not purely tactical preference. It was necessity imposed by industrial inadequacy and logistical limitation. The consequences of this disparity became apparent in the first major ground engagements between American and Japanese forces. Guadalcanal, August 7, 1942. United States Marines stormed ashore on this previously unknown island in the Solomon Chain, initiating the first major American ground offensive of the Pacific War. The Marines quickly secured Henderson Field, the partially completed airstrip that was the operation's primary objective. Then they dug in, establishing a defensive perimeter around the airfield, and waited for the Japanese response. That response came quickly. Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo assigned the 17th Army, a corps-sized command based at Rabaul, with the task of retaking Guadalcanal. Units began arriving in late August, initiating a 6-month campaign that would test both sides to the limit of endurance. The first major engagement occurred on August 21st, when Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki led approximately 917 soldiers of the 28th Infantry Regiment in a night attack against Marine positions along the Tenaru River. The attack was conducted in the classic Japanese style, aggressive, determined, and built around the infantry assault. Japanese doctrine emphasized the bayonet charge, the willingness of soldiers to close with the enemy regardless of cost, and the belief that superior fighting spirit could overcome material disadvantages. The Marines, dug into prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire, met the attack with everything they had. Rifles cracked in the darkness. Mortars burst among the charging Japanese infantry. Artillery fire fell on the far bank of the river, interdicting reinforcements, and machine guns, M1919s mounted on tripods with pre-registered fields of fire, poured sustained fire into the attacking forces. The volume of American fire shocked the Japanese survivors. They had expected resistance. They had anticipated casualties. But they had not prepared for the sheer weight of metal that American weapons could deliver. M1919 machine guns, firing 500 rounds per minute, created walls of bullets that no amount of courage could penetrate. Japanese soldiers fell in windrows, cut down before they could close to bayonet range. The battle lasted through the night and into the morning of August 21st. When it ended, 877 Japanese soldiers were dead. 15 were captured, most of them wounded and unconscious. Colonel Ichiki, realizing the magnitude of his defeat, burned the regimental colours and committed suicide. Marine casualties were 44 dead and 71 wounded. The disparity was not primarily a function of Japanese tactical incompetence or Marine superiority in training. It was a function of firepower. American machine guns had delivered sustained, overwhelming fire that Japanese attackers could not match and could not overcome. The Type 92 seconds supporting the attack, slow firing and strip-fed, provided inadequate suppression of Marine positions. Japanese infantry, trained for close combat and bayonet fighting, were cut down before they could reach their objectives. The pattern established at the Tenaru repeated throughout the Guadalcanal campaign, Japanese forces, attacking with determination and accepting horrific casualties, repeatedly failed to dislodge Marines from their positions. American firepower, particularly machine gun fire, proved decisive time and again. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, fought September 12th through 14th, saw Japanese forces make a major effort to penetrate Marine defenses and capture Henderson Field. Approximately 6,000 soldiers under Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi attacked positions held by approximately 800 Marines of the 1st Raider Battalion and 1st Parachute Battalion, commanded by Colonel Merritt Edson. The attacks came in waves, beginning after nightfall on September 12th. Japanese infantry advanced through the jungle, infiltrating between Marine positions, attempting to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers and ferocity. The fighting was close, brutal, and confused. Marines found themselves engaged in point-blank firefights, with enemies emerging from the darkness at distances measured in feet rather than yards. But Marine machine gunners, positioned on the ridge's key terrain with overlapping fields of fire, broke attack after attack. The M1919s, firing continuously as ammunition bearers kept belts fed into the weapons, delivered fire at rates that Japanese forces could not match. When Japanese infiltrators got close enough to threaten gun positions, Marines fell back to secondary positions and resumed firing. The ridge's defenders gave ground grudgingly, but the machine guns never stopped firing. By the morning of September 14th, the Japanese assault had failed. Approximately 1,200 Japanese soldiers were dead. Marine casualties were approximately 143 killed and missing, with 192 wounded. Once again, the casualty ratio reflected firepower disparity more than any other single factor. Japanese after-action reports from Guadalcanal, captured by American forces and translated by intelligence services, reveal growing awareness among Japanese commanders that their weapons were inadequate. One report, dated October 1942, and written by a battalion commander whose unit had participated in multiple failed attacks, noted that American automatic weapons fire was far heavier than Japanese planners had anticipated. The report specifically mentioned that American machine guns appeared to fire continuously without pause, while Japanese machine guns required frequent reloading and suffered repeated malfunctions. Another report, from a company commander who survived the October 24th attack on Henderson Field, described American machine gun fire as creating an impenetrable barrier. The commander noted that his soldiers, advancing through jungle at night, could hear the American machine guns firing long before they could see the weapons or their crews. The continuous, mechanical sound was distinctly different from the stuttering fire of Japanese weapons. And when his company emerged from jungle into more open ground and attempted to assault Marine positions, they were cut down almost immediately. The commander estimated that American machine guns were responsible for more than half of his casualties. These reports made their way up the chain of command to higher headquarters in Rabaul and eventually to Tokyo. Japanese military intelligence officers read them, analyzed them, and incorporated their findings into assessments of American capabilities. The conclusions were uncomfortable but undeniable. American firepower superiority was real, significant, and not easily countered. But recognizing a problem and solving it are different matters. Japan's industrial base could not simply start producing weapons equivalent to American equipment. The factories, the skilled workers, the machine tools, the raw materials, all were limited in ways that American industry was not. Japanese arsenals were already operating at full capacity, producing weapons as quickly as resources allowed. There was no reserve capacity to be mobilized, no untapped labor, force to be recruited, no stockpile of strategic materials waiting to be utilized. The disparity in machine gun capability was not an isolated problem. It was symptomatic of a larger reality that Japanese military leadership was beginning to comprehend with growing dread. Japan had challenged a nation whose industrial capacity was an order of magnitude greater than its own. And in industrial warfare, where victory depends on the ability to produce, supply, and maintain military equipment in vast quantities, industrial capacity is destiny. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The realization of Japanese firepower inadequacy spread through the ranks as the war progressed. Junior officers, returning from combat operations, shared their experiences with peers and subordinates. Enlisted men, survivors of battles where American machine guns had decimated their units, spoke quietly among themselves about the impossibility of their situation, and gradually, inevitably, morale began to erode. This erosion was not immediate or universal. Japanese military culture emphasized obedience, dedication, and acceptance of sacrifice. Soldiers were trained to view death in service of the emperor as the highest honor. Tactical setbacks were to be overcome through renewed determination, not by questioning the adequacy of equipment or doctrine. To express doubt about weapons or tactics could be construed as defeatism, a serious offense in the Imperial Japanese Army. But private doubts are different from public statements. In diaries and letters, in conversations with trusted comrades, in the thoughts that occupy a soldier's mind during the quiet hours before battle, Japanese soldiers grappled with the growing awareness that courage and dedication were not enough. The Americans had better weapons, more ammunition, and industrial capacity that Japan could never match. This was not defeatism, it was observation of objective reality. One particularly revealing diary, captured on Saipan in June 1944 and translated by American intelligence, belonged to a sergeant who had served continuously since the China campaign of 1937. The sergeant had participated in the conquest of Malaya, fought at Guadalcanal, and survived the evacuation before being reassigned to the Marianas. His diary entries from Guadalcanal described machine gun fire in terms that revealed both professional analysis and personal fear. The sergeant noted that American machine guns created a sound like tearing cloth, continuous and unbroken, distinctly different from the rhythmic hammering of Japanese weapons. He observed that American positions often had multiple machine guns firing simultaneously, creating interlocking fields of fire that made approach nearly impossible. And he commented, in an entry dated November 3, 1942, that his Type 92 heavy machine gun had jammed 3 times during a single engagement, while American weapons fired continuously without apparent malfunction. The diary's final entry regarding machine guns, written shortly before the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal in early February 1943, was stark. "We cannot win firefights against American machine guns. Our weapons are too slow, too prone to failure, and we never have enough ammunition. The men know this. They go forward because orders require it, because honor demands it. But they know." This was the reality that Captain Yamamoto confronted when he test-fired that captured Browning M1919 in the Philippine jungle in February 1945. He was not discovering something new. He was confirming what thousands of Japanese soldiers had learned through bitter experience over the preceding 3 years of war. The mathematical reality of machine gun disparity was only one dimension of a larger problem. The true crisis facing Japanese infantry was not simply that American machine guns fired faster. It was that every aspect of American small arms firepower, from individual rifles to squad automatic weapons to company-level machine guns, represented a systematic advantage that compounded across every level of combat. At the individual soldier level, American forces carried the M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. This weapon, adopted in 1936 and issued widely by 1941, represented a revolutionary advancement in infantry firepower. The Garand fired the same .30-06 cartridge used in the M1919 machine gun, delivering substantial stopping power with each shot. But its defining characteristic was its semi-automatic action. A soldier could fire 8 rounds as rapidly as he could pull the trigger, without manually operating a bolt between shots. Japanese infantry, by contrast, carried bolt-action rifles throughout the war. The Type 38, introduced in 1905 and still in widespread use in 1945, fired the 6.5mm Arisaka cartridge. The Type 99, introduced in 1939 to fire the more powerful 7.7mm cartridge, was gradually replacing the Type 38, but production limitations meant both weapons remained in service until war's end. Both were well-made bolt-action rifles with strong receivers and adequate accuracy, but both required manual cycling between shots. The tactical implications were profound. An American rifleman could deliver aimed fire at roughly twice the rate of a Japanese rifleman. In a squad-level firefight, this meant American forces could put significantly more rounds downrange, even when outnumbered. The Garand's semi-automatic action also made it more effective in jungle fighting, where engagements often occurred at close range and targets appeared briefly before disappearing into vegetation. A Japanese soldier, having fired one shot, needed a fraction of a second to work, and his rifle's bolt, chamber a new round, reacquire his target, and fire again. By that time, in dense jungle, the target was often gone. American military doctrine recognized and exploited this advantage. Infantry tactics emphasized aggressive fire and movement, with riflemen laying down suppressive fire while other squad members maneuvered. The Garand's rate of fire made this practical. Japanese doctrine, developed around bolt-action rifles, emphasized careful fire discipline and conservation of ammunition. Japanese soldiers were trained to fire single, well-aimed shots rather than to generate volume of fire. This was partially cultural, reflecting Bushido traditions of precision and discipline, but it was also practical necessity. Japanese industry could not supply ammunition at the rates American industry could. At the squad level, American forces employed the Browning automatic rifle, known universally as the BAR. This weapon, designed by John Browning during the First World War, was a gas-operated, magazine-fed automatic rifle that bridged the gap between individual rifles and true machine guns. The BAR fired the .30-06 cartridge from a 20-round detachable box magazine. It could be fired semi-automatically for precise shots or fully automatically for suppressive fire. The BAR's cyclic rate of fire was approximately 500 to 650 rounds per minute in automatic mode, though the 20-round magazine meant that continuous fire was limited to brief bursts before reloading became necessary. Nevertheless, the BAR provided American squads with portable automatic fire support that Japanese squads lacked. An American infantry squad in the Pacific typically included 1 or 2 BAR gunners. These soldiers provided suppressive fire during movement, engaged enemy positions during assaults, and delivered rapid fire during defensive actions. Japanese squads relied on the Type 96 or Type 99 light machine gun for automatic fire support. These weapons, as previously described, were effective within their limitations, but they were heavier than the BAR, required a dedicated two-man crew, and were more complex to maintain. Japanese squads typically had 1 light machine gun. American squads had 1 or 2 BARs plus M1 Garands for every rifleman. The cumulative firepower advantage was overwhelming, but the disparity extended beyond small arms to the supporting weapons that provided the foundation for infantry combat effectiveness. American infantry companies had organic heavy weapons platoons, equipped with M1919 machine guns and 60mm mortars. These weapons were issued in sufficient quantities that every defensive position, every assault element, every patrol of significant size could be supported by crew-served weapons delivering sustained fire. Japanese infantry companies had similar organizational structures on paper, with heavy weapons platoons equipped with Type 92 machine guns and grenade dischargers. But the reality rarely matched the organizational charts. Shortages of weapons, ammunition, and trained crews meant that Japanese companies often operated with fewer machine guns than their authorized strength. Those weapons they did have were slower firing, less reliable, and less well supplied than their American counterparts. The compound effect of these disparities transformed the tactical balance. In a company-level engagement, American forces could deliver several times the firepower of a comparably sized Japanese force. This was not simply a matter of more bullets flying through the air. It represented the ability to suppress enemy positions more effectively, to break up enemy attacks more decisively, and to cover friendly movements more completely. Japanese infantry tactics, developed during operations in China where opponents lacked modern equipment and training, emphasized aggressive assault, infiltration, and close combat. These tactics assumed that Japanese forces could close with the enemy despite casualties, that fighting spirit would overcome material disadvantages, and that bayonet charges could carry positions that firepower alone could not. Against Chinese forces in the 1930s, these assumptions proved valid. Against American forces in the 1940s, they proved catastrophically wrong. The night attack became a signature Japanese tactic throughout the Pacific War. Japanese commanders, recognizing that daylight assaults against prepared American positions resulted in prohibitive casualties, shifted to nighttime operations. Darkness reduced the effectiveness of American firepower advantages. Visual identification of targets became difficult. Fields of fire that were clearly defined in daylight became ambiguous at night, and Japanese soldiers, trained in night operations and comfortable with limited visibility, could infiltrate through American lines and create chaos in rear areas. But night attacks carried their own problems. Coordination was difficult. Units became separated in darkness and dense vegetation. Command and control broke down, and American defensive doctrine adapted to counter nighttime infiltration. Marines and Army troops learned to establish defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire, to use illumination rounds and trip flares to reveal infiltrators, and to rely on machine guns firing on fixed lines to interdict likely approach routes. The Type 92's distinctive sound became a liability during night attacks. American troops, hearing the woodpecker's slow cadence, could identify Japanese machine gun positions even when they couldn't see them. This allowed American mortar crews to call for fire on Japanese support weapons, eliminating them before they could provide effective suppression. American machine guns, by contrast, sounded similar to one another, making it difficult for Japanese forces to distinguish individual weapon positions or to estimate how many machine guns were engaging them. On Tarawa, in November 1943, Marines assaulting heavily fortified Japanese positions discovered that even prepared defenses could be overwhelmed by superior firepower. The Japanese garrison, approximately 4,700 men of the Special Naval Landing Forces and combat engineers, had constructed an elaborate system of bunkers, pillboxes, and fighting positions connected by trenches and protected by wire obstacles. The defenses were among the strongest the Japanese had yet constructed in the Pacific. The Marines' assault, launched on November 20th, met fierce resistance. Japanese defenders, protected by thick concrete and coconut log construction, poured fire into attacking Marines. The first waves suffered heavy casualties crossing the reef and approaching the beach. But Marine infantry, supported by Sherman tanks, engineers with demolitions, and flamethrower teams, systematically reduced the Japanese positions. The assault succeeded because American forces could deliver overwhelming firepower at the point of attack. Sherman tank guns blasted bunkers at close range. Engineers placed explosive charges against pillbox apertures. Flamethrowers scorched firing positions, and M1919 machine guns, set up to provide overwatch, suppressed any Japanese attempt to reinforce threatened sectors. Japanese defenders fought with characteristic determination. They held their positions until killed or until their positions were physically destroyed. They conducted counterattacks when opportunities presented themselves, but they could not match the volume of fire that American forces delivered. Type 92 machine guns, positioned in bunkers with limited fields of fire, provided some defensive capability, but their slow rate of fire and limited ammunition supply meant they could not prevent American forces from moving between positions, bringing up supporting weapons, and concentrating force against one strong point after another. The battle lasted 76 hours, When it ended, only 17 Japanese defenders had been captured alive out of the original 4,700. Marine casualties were 1,990 killed and 2,296 wounded. The casualty exchange rate was far more even than at Guadalcanal, reflecting the strength of the Japanese defences and the difficulty of amphibious assault. But even in defence, fighting from prepared positions with overlapping fields of fire, Japanese forces could not overcome American firepower advantages. At Saipan, in June 1944, the firepower disparity reached its most dramatic demonstration when Japanese forces committed their armour to a desperate counterattack. The 9th Tank Regiment, equipped with Type 95 Hargo light tanks and Type 97 Chiha medium tanks, attacked 2nd Marine Division positions in the pre-dawn hours of June 17th. The attack has been extensively documented elsewhere, but its relevance to the machine gun story lies in what happened to Japanese infantry advancing with the tanks. Marine machine gunners, positioned in defensive lines with pre-registered fields of fire, engaged the attacking infantry with M1919s and Browning M250 caliber heavy machine guns. The sustained fire shredded the Japanese infantry formations. Soldiers attempting to keep pace with the tanks were cut down. Those seeking cover in shell holes or behind terrain features found themselves pinned by continuous machine gun fire. The attack, intended to drive Marines from their positions and disrupt the American advance, collapsed within hours. But it was on Iwo Jima, in February and March 1945, that the cumulative effect of Japanese firepower inadequacy became most apparent. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, recognized that traditional tactics had failed throughout the Pacific. He understood that banzai charges and aggressive counterattacks played to American strengths, allowing superior firepower to inflict maximum casualties on attacking Japanese forces. Kuribayashi developed a different approach. Rather than meeting the American landing with immediate counterattack, he ordered his forces to remain in prepared positions. Rather than attempting to prevent Marines from establishing a beachhead, he planned to exact maximum casualties as American forces advanced inland. And rather than concentrating forces for decisive attacks, he dispersed his troops throughout an elaborate system of tunnels, caves, and fortified positions that covered the island. The defense of Iwo Jima was the most sophisticated and effective that Japanese forces mounted during the Pacific War. Kuribayashi's troops fought from positions that were difficult to locate, harder to suppress, and nearly impossible to assault without heavy casualties. They held their fire until American troops were within killing range. They conserved ammunition and made every shot count, and they inflicted approximately 26,000 American casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed, over 36 days of combat. But even Kuribayashi's masterful defense could not overcome fundamental firepower inadequacy. American forces, supported by massive naval gunfire, airstrikes, and artillery, delivered overwhelming fire support that gradually reduced Japanese positions. Marine and Army infantry, backed by tanks and advancing behind barrages, cleared the island position by position. And American machine guns, providing suppressive fire and defending captured positions, proved decisive time and again. Japanese defenders attempted counterattacks, particularly during nighttime hours when American firepower advantages were reduced. But Marine machine gunners, firing on fixed lines with interlocking fields of fire, broke up these attacks before they could reach American lines. The Type 92 seconds, supporting Japanese counterattacks, positioned in caves and fighting positions, provided some suppressive fire, but they could not deliver the sustained volume of fire necessary to pin American defenders while Japanese assault troops advanced. One after-action report from the 5th Marine Division, dated March 10, 1945, included observations from machine gun platoon leaders regarding Japanese weapons. The report noted that Japanese machine gun fire, when encountered, was easily distinguishable by its slow rate and distinctive sound. The report observed that Japanese machine guns appeared to fire in short bursts, suggesting either fire discipline to conserve ammunition or mechanical limitations preventing sustained fire. And the report concluded that Japanese machine guns did not present a significant threat to marine operations, as their limited volume of fire could be suppressed by American weapons. This assessment, clinical and matter-of-fact, represented a stunning reversal from the early days of the Pacific War, when Japanese forces had been feared for in their skill and determination. By March 1945, American forces viewed Japanese machine guns not as formidable weapons, but as minor obstacles to be suppressed and bypassed. The psychological impact of this reality on Japanese defenders is difficult to overstate. Soldiers who had trained with the Type 92, who had been told it was a powerful and effective weapon, discovered through combat experience that it was inadequate. They watched American machine guns fire continuously, while their own weapons required frequent reloading. They experienced malfunctions at critical moments, while American weapons functioned reliably, and they witnessed the effects of American suppressive fire, which was qualitatively different from anything their weapons could produce. Private Tadashi Kato, a machine gunner captured on Okinawa in June 1945, told American interrogators that he had operated a Type 92 for 2 years. He described the weapon as reliable when properly maintained, but slow-firing and difficult to keep supplied with ammunition. When asked to compare the Type 92 to American machine guns he had observed, Kato stated that American weapons fired much faster and seemed never to run out of ammunition. He noted that his squad had been trained to conserve ammunition and fire in short bursts, but American machine gunners appeared to fire continuously whenever targets presented themselves. Another prisoner, a sergeant who had served as a machine gun section leader, provided more detailed assessment. He explained that Japanese machine gun doctrine emphasized precision and ammunition conservation. Gunners were trained to identify specific targets and engage them with short, controlled bursts. This contrasted sharply with what he had observed of American machine gun employment, which emphasized volume of fire and sustained suppression. The sergeant acknowledged that the American approach was more effective in most tactical situations, but noted that it was only possible because American forces had seemingly unlimited ammunition. This observation highlighted a critical reality. The disparity in machine gun effectiveness was not solely a function of weapon design. It reflected the entire industrial and logistical system supporting each nation's military forces. American machine guns were superior weapons, but they were also supported by superior production capacity, superior logistics, and superior ammunition supply. Japanese machine guns, even if they had been mechanically equivalent to American weapons, would still have been handicapped by inadequate ammunition supply and unreliable logistics. The supply problem became catastrophic as the war progressed. American submarines and aircraft systematically destroyed Japanese merchant shipping, cutting off the flow of raw materials from Southeast Asian territories to Japanese factories. What had been inadequate production capacity became critically insufficient. Ammunition production declined. Weapons production fell. Quality control suffered as factories struggled to maintain output with limited materials and increasingly inexperienced workers. By 1945, Japanese forces throughout the Pacific were operating on starvation logistics. Defenders on bypassed islands received no resupply at all. Forces on islands that American strategy designated for invasion received minimal supplies before the invasion began and nothing thereafter. Even units defending the Japanese home islands faced shortages that limited their combat effectiveness. Ammunition shortages were particularly acute for machine guns. The Type 92, with its slow rate of fire, had been designed partially to address ammunition conservation concerns. But by 1945, even that reduced consumption rate exceeded available supply. Machine gun crews were issued strict ammunition allocations and ordered not to exceed them except in the most critical circumstances. Some units reported having fewer than 1,000 rounds per machine gun when American forces landed, enough for perhaps 20 minutes of sustained fire at the Type 92's maximum rate. American forces, by contrast, landed with ammunition supplies measured in millions of rounds. Ships offshore carried vast reserves. Supply dumps established on captured beachheads held thousands of belts, and the logistics system ensured continuous resupply as operations progressed. American machine gun crews never had to conserve ammunition in the way Japanese crews did. If a position needed suppressing, they suppressed it. If a target presented itself, they engaged it. The ammunition would be there. This disparity in supply magnified the disparity in weapon capability. A Type 92 that could theoretically fire 450 rounds per minute was limited in practice to whatever rate its ammunition allocation allowed. An M1919 that could sustain 500 rounds per minute could fire at that rate for as long as the tactical situation required, confident that ammunition would be available. The compound effect of inferior weapons, insufficient training, inadequate ammunition supply, and unsustainable logistics created a situation where Japanese infantry effectiveness degraded throughout the war. Units that fought with determination in 1942 were shadows of their former capability by 1945. The soldiers were no less brave, the officers were no less dedicated, but the material foundation for effective combat had eroded beyond recovery. Japanese military leadership understood this reality. Intelligence reports, after-action assessments, and communications from field commanders painted a consistent picture of deteriorating capability and declining prospects. But understanding a problem and solving it are different matters. Japan's industrial base could not suddenly match American production. Logistics networks could not be rebuilt while under constant attack, and weapons could not be redesigned and manufactured when factories lacked materials and workers. Some efforts were made to address specific deficiencies. The Type 99 light machine gun, with its improved rate of fire and elimination of the troublesome oiling system, represented recognition that earlier weapons had significant flaws. But Type 99 production never reached levels sufficient to replace all earlier models. Many Japanese units fought until war's end with Type 96 light machine guns and Type 92 heavy machine guns, weapons whose inadequacy had been apparent since Guadalcanal. Other efforts focused on tactical adaptation. Kuribayashi's defensive strategy on Iwo Jima demonstrated that superior American firepower could be partially countered through intelligent defensive preparation and disciplined fire control. But such tactics could delay defeat, not prevent it, and they required resources: cement for fortifications, engineers to build positions, time to prepare defenses that were increasingly scarce as American forces advanced closer to Japan itself. The final months of the Pacific War saw Japanese forces reduced to desperate measures. On Okinawa, the last major island battle before the planned invasion of Japan proper, Japanese defenders fought with diminishing supplies and deteriorating equipment. Machine gun crews hoarded their limited ammunition, firing only at the most critical moments. Some positions had insufficient ammunition to conduct sustained defensive fire, forcing crews to use their machine guns as single-shot weapons to conserve what little they had. American forces advancing across Okinawa encountered Japanese positions where machine guns had been carefully sighted for maximum effect, but held almost no ammunition. In some cases, positions were captured with fewer than 100 rounds remaining. Interrogation of prisoners revealed that ammunition shortages had become so severe that some machine gun crews had been ordered to save their fire for immolation. Final defensive fires when American troops were within bayonet charge distance. This was the nadir of Japanese machine gun employment. Sophisticated weapons, placement, and tactical positioning rendered meaningless by lack of ammunition to fire through them. The disparity between Japanese and American firepower, which had been significant in 1942, had become absolute by 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. Japanese military forces throughout the Pacific and Asia began the process of laying down their arms. Machine gun crews, who had manned their weapons through years of combat, disassembled their Type 92 seconds for the final time. Some wept. Others felt only relief that the ordeal was ending, but all understood that they had fought with weapons that were inadequate for the war they had been asked to fight. American forces occupying Japan encountered vast stockpiles of weapons that had never reached combat units. Warehouses held thousands of machine guns, rifles, and other equipment that Japanese logistics could not deliver to troops in the field. Some of this equipment had been held back for the defense of the home islands, reserved for the invasion that never came, but much of it simply reflected the breakdown of Japan's distribution system, with weapons piling up in depots while frontline units fought with depleted supplies. Technical intelligence teams examined captured Japanese weapons with professional interest. Their assessments, documented in detailed reports, provided comprehensive analysis of Japanese small arms. The reports praised some aspects of Japanese weapon design, noting that the Type 99 rifle had one of the strongest actions ever developed and that Japanese machine guns showed evidence of careful engineering. But the reports also catalogued the deficiencies that had rendered Japanese weapons inadequate. The Type 92's slow rate of fire was specifically noted as a significant tactical limitation. The strip-feeding system was identified as inferior to belt-fed designs. The oiling system was criticized as prone to malfunction in adverse conditions, and the overall assessment concluded that Japanese machine guns, while serviceable, were substantially inferior to comparable American and European weapons. These technical assessments, clinical and objective, failed to capture the human dimension of machine gun inadequacy. They noted rates of fire and feeding mechanisms, but said nothing about soldiers who died because their supporting fire was insufficient to suppress enemy positions. They described mechanical characteristics, but omitted the desperation of machine gun crews who ran out of ammunition during critical engagements. They analyzed design choices, but ignored the industrial and strategic constraints that forced those choices. The true story of Japanese machine guns in the Second World War is not found in technical specifications or ordnance reports. It is found in the experiences of men like Captain Yamamoto, who test-fired a captured American weapon and understood with sudden clarity why Japan was losing. It is found in the diaries of sergeants who watched their weapons malfunction, while American machine guns fired continuously. It is found in the after-action reports of commanders who launched attacks that failed because their suppressive fire was inadequate. It is found in the mathematics of industrial warfare, where a nation's productive capacity determines its military effectiveness more surely than courage or dedication or tactical skill. And it is found in the simple, brutal arithmetic of sustained fire, 500 rounds per minute against 450, compounded across thousands of engagements, multiplied by superior logistics and unlimited ammunition supply, equals victory. The woodpecker's slow cadence, so distinctive on Pacific battlefields, became a symbol of Japan's inadequacy in industrial warfare. The nickname, coined by Allied soldiers who heard the weapon's stuttering fire, captured something essential about the disparity between the combatants. American machine guns hummed with mechanical precision, sustained and reliable. Japanese machine guns pecked away, intermittent and inadequate. That difference, multiplied across every aspect of military capability, determined the war's outcome more surely than any battle or campaign. Japan had challenged a nation whose industrial capacity was an order of magnitude greater than its own. And in modern warfare, where victory depends on the ability to produce, supply, and maintain military equipment in vast quantities, industrial capacity is destiny. Captain Yamamoto understood this as he crouched behind that shattered pillbox in the Philippine jungle, his hands on an American machine gun, listening to its mechanical precision as it cycled 500 rounds per minute. He understood that the weapon in his hands represented not just superior engineering, but an entire industrial civilization that Japan could never match. He understood that every Japanese soldier who died charging into American machine gun fire was a victim not merely of enemy weapons, but of strategic decisions made years earlier, decisions to challenge an opponent whose material advantages rendered courage and determination meaningless. And he understood, with perfect clarity, that Japan had lost the war the moment it began. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.